This video has been brought to you by DataVinci Analytics Agency.
Hey there, welcome back to DataVinci's YouTube channel. Today, we have a really interesting topic lined up for you. Today, we are going to be looking at how you can create a customer retention report with the GA4 data that you have in BigQuery and use Google Sheets and Looker Studio for the same purpose. So let's get started. What are we going to cover? First, we'll see how you can draft a SQL query for getting the particular data that we need for this particular report. And then we'll do some data preparation in Google Sheets. You can do this within BigQuery itself, but you would need to write some custom queries to do so. And for the sake of tutorial, we'll use Google Sheets as it's a much intuitive and interactive tool. Finally, we'll use Looker Studio for data visualization. And that's it. You would have your customer retention report to show it to your PMO or any type or any person who would like to know the customer retention of your organization. The data or the architecture of the report would look something like this. We have the data that is coming from GA4 into BigQuery. This is one prerequisite for this particular video, that you need to have some sufficient amount of data within BigQuery for this particular report to be useful, at least 6 to 7 months worth of data, so that you can at least visualize weekly cohorts or instead monthly cohorts. And once we have the data within BigQuery, we need to draft a SQL query, which will basically get the daily transactional records of the customers and get that into Google Sheets. Once we have that in Google Sheets, we can prepare some functions to basically fetch the cohort or the first purchase date, things like that, to get us the customer retention report. So if that's clear to you, let's give it a shot. So what exactly is cohort analysis? So you can think of cohort analysis as a way of grouping your customers based on certain common characteristics. These characteristics could be things like your acquisition date, the acquisition channel, the first purchase date, and so on. So this basically helps us to understand how different groups of customers behave over time, which is super useful for understanding what keeps them coming back and stay on as a customer. So if that's clear to you, let's move on to customer retention analysis. You might wonder, why should we even care about customer retention in the first place, right? So it turns out that retaining existing customers is actually much easier and cheaper as opposed to onboarding new customers. Studies have shown that a 5% increase in your customer retention can lead to nearly 25 to 95% increase in a company's profitability. So it is one of those lower hanging fruits that the companies usually ignore in their business strategies. But improving your customer retention can be one of those areas which your business can improve on. Okay, so by the end of the video, this is what the output would look like. This is one of the reports that would be created with the data set that we would be making now. So this is a customer retention analysis report done via cohort analysis. The cohort out here is the first purchase month. So to understand this quite easily, you can just take one of the cohorts, say for example, October 2023. So the column over here, the columns out here are nothing but the months between the first and the last purchase. So month 0 is nothing but the first purchase month. That means October 2023. Month 1 would be November 2023 for that particular cohort. So to understand this, you can take one cell for example. So in October 2023, we had 6131 purchases. And from those 6131 purchases, in the following month, 432 of them came back to repeat purchase. And similarly, 271 came back in the third month, that is December, or second month actually, to purchase. So that shows you how one particular group of customers are coming back to your site, basically showing you customer retention. Now over here, we've considered the cohort as a first purchase month. You can use the cohort as maybe the product name, the acquisition channel, things like maybe depending on the region as well. So it depends on your business use case. The second chart that we have is related to the percentage. It's nothing but the ratio of the first month as compared to the relative months. So for instance, in month one or in the month zero, we have 100% of the customers. In month one, in the following month, we retain 7% of them. In month two, we retain 4.42. That is, we are talking about the October 2023 cohort. And that is how the cohort has lined up. On average, we are retaining about 3.24% customers in the first month, 2% in the second month. So basically, if, for example, 100 people shopped in October 2023, in December, from those 100, only 2 people would come back to shop in December 2023. So that is what this 2% is showing you. So this particular report would be the end output of this particular video. So let's get started. So let's first dive into BigQuery, and over here we'll operate with the sample data provided by Google. You can click on add and search for Google Analytics. Doesn't seem to show up for Google Analytics. Yep, let's go to public data sets, and now let's search for Google Analytics. Yeah, and you'll find this Google Analytics sample data. You can click on it, and it would show you a CTA where you can view the data set. It would open up a new BigQuery tab in which the data set would be available on the sidebar like it is available out here. So within this Google Analytics data, we have GA sessions data, that is UA data actually. And this particular data is from GA4. So we can see the schema. So GA4 has a schema in the sense the schema is nested. So it has event date. This is one row, but within that one row, we have multiple rows embedded within it. So we need to use a particular function that extracts those values. I've already drafted out the query, and let me explain it to you. And I'll add this particular document into the descriptions so that you can modify the query as per your dataset and get the data. So if you're using the BigQuery or the sample data, you do not need to change this particular table name. You can keep it as is. So let's start from the starting. So for a particular report, what we need is we need a unique identifier for a user, say the user ID. Secondly, we need the date of the purchase, since we are doing a customer retention analysis for purchasing customers, as in the repeat purchasers. In case if you're doing not for purchase, you may be doing it for some other event, or maybe just generally, how many times is the user coming back onto the site? You can do that as well, but you'd need to change the query as per that. So we are getting the date of purchase, we're getting a unique identifier for the user. Then we are getting the transaction ID in order to identify or count the unique number of transactions. And with respect to the transaction ID, we are getting the transaction amount. To get the later on, we can use the same particular data set to build an LTV report. But this particular video will focus on customer retention. In the future video, we'll be covering how you can build the LTV report with the same particular data set. So let's go to Google Sheets and write down what we mentioned. So we need the date. we need the user ID, we need the transaction ID, and we need the transaction amount. All right. Now let's look at the query. So the query is something like this. So in GA4, we have an identifier called user pseudo ID, which stores the user identifier. And secondly, we have this particular function called unnest. Now, unnest is a way of unnesting the nested rows that we showed you, right? So over here, we have a nested row where the event date is out here, and we can see that it has multiple parameters in a nested way. So this particular function in BigQuery can be used to unnest it. So we are specifying what we want to unnest. We want to unnest the event parameters, where the event parameter is session ID. So we're getting the session ID, and then we are passing the event date as a date type, so pass date, and then we are specifying which particular event are we looking for, so which event date. So we are looking for the purchase event, and then we can draft it as, and then we can also get the transaction ID from e-commerce.transaction ID. Similarly, you can specify the event name and get the quantity. This is not really required, you can skip this. And then you can again specify the name and get the purchase revenue, which is nothing but the transaction amount. So this all is in a common table expression, also called as a CTE, and we've named it as prep. And then below this particular CTE, we are basically just fetching these particular values. So we are getting the date, we're getting the user pseudo ID, we're getting the transaction ID, and then we're getting the purchase. We've enclosed it into a coalesce function, which is nothing but a way of handling the data such that if it is a null value, it can be drafted or it can be casted as 0. And over here, we're adding a filter where the transaction ID is not null or the transaction ID is not set, such that we do not get any null rows. And finally, we're grouping by the date, user ID, and transaction ID so that we can apply the sum function on the purchase revenue. There are multiple videos out there on how you can handle GA4 data within BigQuery. So that's why I'm skipping on how this particular query has been drafted. Rather, I'll focus on how we can use the particular data set, because these queries can be easily drafted with ChatGPT, and that is what I have done as well. So feel free to use this query and modify it as per your needs. You can modify the table and the dataset name. So probably you need to change this particular to the project ID and this to the dataset ID. And over here, you can keep it as events underscore star. This just means that it is getting all of the events tables. So GA4 creates multiple events tables as per the date. But if you want an overall analysis, you would like to get all of the events table, right? So you can just get that using this particular command. So once we run this query, let's see what the output is. Where is the error? Surprisingly, there's an error. Let's run it again. Okay. So the output that we get is the date, the user pseudo ID, which is nothing but the user ID that we're considering. It is nothing but the client ID actually, and transaction ID, and the purchase revenue, which is the transaction amount that we needed. So once you get this particular data set, you can save it as a local file, or you can directly export it into Google Sheets, or maybe you can even add it to a JSON file and then convert it into a CSV. There are multiple ways of how we can do the next steps. Now, once we get this particular data into Google Sheets, it would look something like this. So we have the date, the user ID, the transaction ID, and the purchase revenue. These two columns are function columns. I'll just show you in a couple of minutes what they are actually. So this is how the first part of the data preparation is. Now let's move on to the second part where we add or we modify the data as per our needs in Google Sheets such that we can use it for visualization purposes. So I'm not using the Google sample data because the Google sample data is quite small. It just has data for a couple of months. Therefore, I have gotten actual real data from a different GA4 property. The name would be obviously anonymous, but this is how the data looks like in that particular property. So we again have the date, user ID, transaction ID, and the purchase revenue. For getting this particular data set, I didn't change anything in the query. I just changed the data set and the table name. So you can do the same as well. So now what we need to do is we need to first extract the month of the purchase. So we would basically standardize the date. So over here it is 18th October, right? So we need to standardize it to fetch the month basically. So you can fetch the month using the end of month formula, which is nothing but a formula to get the end of month. And what you do is you can minus 1 month from that and just add 1 day. So basically you would be getting the first date of that particular month. And then we are using an array formula so that we don't need to copy paste the formula in all of these cells below. Similarly, for this particular user ID, we need to get the first purchase month, which is nothing but the cohort that we are considering for this particular user. In that case, we can use the minif formula where it checks a particular range. So the range out here is E, which is nothing but the purchase month. So basically from the purchase month, it is getting the minimum date for this particular user ID. All right. And then you just basically copy paste this formula down so that you can get the first purchase month. So for instance, let's look at a particular person who has repeat purchased. So for example, so this particular user, let's search how many records this particular user has. It should have 2 records as it's showing that the first purchase month was in November. It's probably going to take a lot of time because there are multiple rows out here around, I believe around 130k rows. So Google Sheets is not really great at handling such amounts of data. Anyway, let's give it a couple of seconds if it loads good enough. Never mind. So the next column that we need is nothing but the month between the first and the last purchase, which is quite simple, right? Where you just take the difference between the 2 dates. So you get the start date and you use the date diff formula, which requires the start date and the end date, and you specify in what unit do you want the difference in the date. By M we mean months. So if the difference between the first purchase month and the purchase month is 0, that means it's in the same month. If the difference between the first purchase month and the purchase month is 1, that means the first purchase was done a month prior to it, right? So that is nothing but the months between the first and the last purchase column. So once this particular data set is ready, we are now ready to visualize this particular data. Okay, so now that we have this particular data source ready, We can now use it in Looker Studio to start with an exploration. So you can create a blank Looker Studio report and as Google Sheets as the data source and click on add and it should be added. Okay, so the data source has been added and Looker Studio by default creates a chart for us. So we can skip this. We can basically just change the chart type to pivot table to make things easier. Let me extend it out. And now, so you can select the date range dimension. The date range dimension should be the date itself. And for the row, we are going to be adding the first purchase month. And let's display it as the month. So year and month. For the column, we would want the number of months between the first and the last purchase. So you can select that. And for the value, we basically want the unique customer count, right? So we can do that by using the user pseudo ID. We can create a custom field or a calculated field, which basically would be the count of the unique users. Let's just call it customers. And click on save and click on finish. Let's give it some time to load up. Because the data source is quite big, it is taking some time to get loaded. And now you can change the metric from the record count to customers. And few more changes that you need to make out here is the sorting. So for sorting, you can select the first purchase month. We want it to be ascending. And again, for columns, you would want it to be ascending in terms of the months between first and the last purchase. So, all right, so we are almost done. So the months between first and the last purchase is getting parsed as a date property, which should not be the case because this is actually a numeric property. Let me put it as numeric and let's click on finish. And hopefully now it should be in its right format. Not quite. Let's keep it as default and let's see. Yeah, now it's fixed. So this is how the chart looked like, right? And now we can just add a few more detailings like a heat map sort of to get the look and feel of cohort analysis, because cohort analysis are usually shown as heat maps. So you can select heat map out here and I usually go with a lighter color. And yeah, so that's the first chart that we were trying to build. This is the raw count of customers that come back to purchase again after their first month. So in October, or rather in November, we had around 12,000 people purchasing for the first time. From those first time purchasers, 500 of them came back in December to purchase again. So this is how we can build the first table that we saw. Now for the second table, we would need to again go to Google Sheets and build out the data source. What we need to do in the second table is use this particular chart that you see out here as a data source for the second chart that we'll build. You'll understand it better once we start building it. So let's get on it. So you can again jump back into your Google Sheets and navigate to the sheet that you have used in Looker Studio right now. And over here, you can click on Insert and click on Pivot Table. Okay, and let's click on Create. All right. Once you have these, or once you have this particular pivot table editor open, you basically just need to recreate this particular chart in Google Sheets. So as we had the row as the first purchase month, let us just load up first purchase month. Don't need the totals, and the column is the month between first and the last purchase. You don't need the totals, and the value is the count of the user sudo ID. Yeah, so this is what we saw, right? So 6131432, 6131432. So this is done. Now, once we have this particular pivot table ready, we can use this as a data source for the chart that we'll be building. So you can create a new sheet and basically get the unique items from the first column. We're basically getting the unique cohort names. We can select from A3 to the complete column. Let me call it the first purchase month. Now, you can name this as month 0, month 1, and let's drag it up to say month 17. So for month 0, we basically want to get a ratio of how many customers are left in that particular month from a particular cohort. So for instance, we see that in October, we had 6131 customers in the first month. So that means 100% of the customers are there in the first month. In the second month, we have 432 customers coming back from the previous 6,000 customers. So the ratio would be 432 divided by 613, which is about 7.05%. So this is what we want to achieve. Now, how can we do that using certain formulas? So let's look at that. So now here, we basically want to sum up a particular range, this range to be specific, from P3 to P. The criteria would be this particular column range. And the matching criteria would be this cell. Now, so we've basically summed over this particular column B, basically month 0, for the first cohort that we have, and that is what we are getting out here. So again, you can apply the SUMIFS formula. I'll just copy paste this out here, and yeah, so now we have the 100% value that we are looking for. Let's lock down the references so that when we copy down the formula, it does not change. Okay, so now if I drag it towards the right hand side, I can still see that it is coming as 100%, which should not be the case. So what needs to change out here? The denominator would be the same because it needs to be the sum of the first month, which is 6131. That is fine. But for the numerator, this actually needs to be the sum of the second column, which is C. We do not need to fix this, so let's keep it. Yep. Let's add the digits, and now let's see whether it applies for month 2 as well. So it is coming as 4.42, which, let's see, it should be 271 divided by 6131. Yep, So the formula is sorted for the rows. Let's see whether it does. Oh, my bad. Tracked the wrong formula. Okay. And let's see if we pull it down whether it applies correctly or not. Nope. So let's see what is the problem out here. Let's build on it. Just drag one cell and see. I'm keeping this part in so that you all know as well. So it seems like I need to fix this particular record. Let's see if that works for this. 4.37. Let's check it out. 524. 524 divided by 11,978. 11,978. Looks like it's working. Yep. So I need to fix the reference to the row but not the column. Now just for a safety measure, we can apply this if error function around our formula so that in case there are no values, it doesn't show up as a value error or a function error. And let's drag it down. Yep. So this is what we want to get into Google Sheets, or rather in Looker Studio now. So once you add your particular data source, it would look something like this. Let me open up the data source, and you would have multiple columns, or rather multiple dimensions, with all the months as shown up as dimension and the first purchase month as well. So we need to draft this as a percentage. So let me just do it for the first 6 months. Month 0, month 1, month 2. For month 3, the same process. 4, 5, and 6. Okay. Once you do that, we are set. Now, for this particular visualization of showing the customer retention rate, we would be using a table. You can click on table and drag it and drop it out here. Make sure you have the particular data source that you added recently selected. And over here, again, the dimension would be the first purchase month. That is essentially our cohort. Let me cast it as year and month. And the metrics would be month 0, followed by month 1, secondly month 2. So you get the idea. Now I can just resize it and make sure that the sorting is not as per the counts, rather you have to sort it as per the cohort. And if I add heat maps to the metrics column, it will look similar to the first chart that we have out here. You can keep the color same so that you can see the variation in the heat map. So I can see that the October 2023 cohort had a better retention rate as compared to the other months. In the other months, the average retention rate was around 4% or 3% or about 5% at max. But in the October month or the or the people who purchased in the October month, they came back in 7% of them came back in the following month. Perhaps due to the Black Friday sale or something like that, but you can figure it out based on your particular business. Now, the final metric that remains from the report that I showed you earlier is nothing but KPIs, where we show the average retention per month. So for that, you can again add the KPI scorecard. And we basically want an average of this particular column. So make sure you select the retention rate report, and let's add month 0 as an average. You can draft it as or rename it as average customer retention rate for month 1. Oh, my bad. I selected month 0. Actually, I should select month 1. And the same process, aggregate as average and rename it. So we can see that the average is about 3.24%. Let me apply some formatting so that it looks better. And you can now replicate this particular KPI for other months. You can copy paste it and select month 2 and make sure you change the aggregation to an average and rename it as per you like. So that was it. That is how you can build a customer retention report. I'll be dropping down the links to the particular Google Sheet. I'll also add the query that I showed you in BigQuery, and I'll link this particular Looker Studio report so that you can maybe create a copy of it or refer it for your particular reference. So creating a customer retention report is not that difficult, but you do see that it is sort of challenging in the sense you need to keep shifting between Google Sheets and Looker Studio. The same process that we did in Google Sheets can be replicated in BigQuery itself, and if you have a steady flowing data into BigQuery and if you want the report to be dynamic, you can use SQL functions to basically recreate this particular data set into BigQuery itself, which regularly updates. So there are multiple ways of how you can do that. Maybe in the future videos, we will create a dynamic report instead of a static one that we showed out here. So that was it for this particular video. If you have any questions, feel free to put it into the comments box. And if you have any comments about how we should make these kinds of videos or how we can improve, feel free to add those as well. So that was all for this particular video. Thank you for your time. Thank you for listening to us. May the force be with you.